Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 82 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, PSCU proudly supports the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Jill Nowacki. Jill is the founder of and CEO of Humanidei, a human capital firm serving credit unions, and also my human. This is Jill's fourth appearance on the show, plus she hosted the season finale of the first season where I was the one on the flip side of the table answering the questions. Some of the past episodes we recorded were in more exotic locations, but this one, due to social distancing, was recorded on the island that is in our kitchen. Jill has been busy the past few months. Human capital, remote work, and DEI have all been front and center. And without knowing it, when, what 2020 would hold for all of us, the passion that she has for credit unions being that driver of change and the forward thinking behind starting her company a year ago makes her the perfect guest for these times to talk about and kind of ask all those big questions that are on all of our minds. We talked about why DEI is so important today and always. We talked about the well-being of your people, your employees, and your members. We talked a lot about leadership and what it takes to be a good leader in such uncertain times. And we also touched on a few points of some of those mistakes leaders have been making as well. And as always, we had some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. I had to make up a few new ones, so Jill couldn't just give us the same answers she did on past conversations we've had. This was so much fun for me. We basically let you all into, the conversations we've been having on our morning COVID walks around the neighborhood. Jill gives us a lot to think about, and there are a lot of nuggets in this episode that I think we will all learn from. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Jill Nowacki. Enjoy. Jill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Randy.
Your fourth appearance, my love, on the podcast. Plus, you hosted an episode. We're going to need to change the name of the show here soon. Interesting times we're living through. How many days has it been since we've been on an airplane?
About 120.
Oh, my goodness. That is way too long. We still need to travel. We will need to figure out how to get status from these road trips that we've been taking. So something that you and I have been talking about recently is what life looks like as more people get back to the office. And that was a topic that on our morning walks we've been talking about, as even kids going back to school and all of that. Would you fill in our listeners on the questions that I guess you've been asking?
Related to this, I definitely ask a lot more questions than I have answers for, and probably a lot more questions than we have time for today. But there are really two big ones that all those little ones stem from. And the first one is, what is the impact on employee engagement for organizations that take away remote work options? So we saw financial institutions move into a remote work environment, prove they can do it, and now
very quickly,
overnight it seems, and now they're in a place where they have to make some decisions. And those that say, "Yeah, that whole remote work thing, it was just an experiment. We're back in the office. There aren't options." There may be some negative effects on employee engagement with that. And then the second big question that I'm asking a lot that I still don't know the answers to, though, is how is COVID-19 going to change the career trajectory of working parents? And specifically concerned about, is it going to erase years of progress for women in the workplace? So we know men are stepping up more in the parenting roles. Maybe it won't, but if schools don't open up this fall, it could really be an interesting trend to watch.
We have friends and family members who are already having this discussion outside of credit unions on, like, does one stay home if the kids do they hope for a furlough? Sorry, it's got the Derby on my mind. But that's an interesting question. Like, are you coming up with a best practice that the leaders of credit unions should do in this case?
I am not coming up with a best practice. So I have a lot more questions than answers.
Yeah.
And in part, that's because I think the working parents aren't coming up with solutions right now. They don't know what they need or what they're going to do, or even in many cases, what their schools are going to do.
That seems to change by the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the best practice I would recommend is just keeping those conversations open, making sure that you're recognizing this really fluid and really concerning situation that employees are facing and keeping the conversation lines open with them.
That is something that I think all of us, whether as leaders or employees or whatever it happens to be, you and I've talked about it even a lot personally, is like plans during COVID aren't in stone. You have to be able to change them as easy as they came into place, right? Because the environment just constantly keeps changing and we don't have that. It's really tough to look out into the crystal ball right now, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's some great advice for sure. Humanidei, it's a human capital firm. You specialize in DEI. And as you often say, people being able to bring their whole self to work. What concerns do you have here as we move through the stages of a global pandemic? Are you seeing new challenges that present themselves, or are they the same challenges that maybe were there beforehand?
I think everything is amplified, perhaps sometimes spotlighted. So balancing acts were hard for working families before COVID hit. They've become much, much harder. And the role for caregivers, I guess I should say, which often falls to women still, it's disproportionately impacting, and the burden of it is much higher because now it's not only kind of make sure everybody's taken care of and still like fed. And now there's also these obligations if you're caring for aging parents to make sure that survival happens and emotional well-being is met. And if you're caring for school-aged children, you're also responsible for making sure they get education needs met. And so that balancing act just intensified. And then from a credit union perspective, as far as members go, so not just looking at it from an employee perspective, there is a widening divide for families in our communities right now. And those people who were pretty economically stable and good going into COVID, most of them worked jobs that were able to be maintained. They were able to quickly switch to remote work from home. People who were of kind of lower wage earners, those were the jobs that people were told you're an essential worker and you show up or you lose your job. And so that widening divide is something that from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective, we are seeing an increased impact on women and people of color with the burden that has come to this. And credit unions are going to need to be in a place where they can really provide solutions for the members of their communities who are facing those challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been let me just put it this way. I hope it's been eye-opening to people, the folks that have been essential.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Often they aren't the highest paid, right? So how do you see this entire experience that we're all sharing changing the way members interact with the credit union?
Right. So that's an interesting question. And there's two ways to approach it. There's that like really technical transactional way to approach it. That's not the one that excites me. When we're talking about members interacting with their credit unions, and I guess maybe to flip that question, credit unions interacting with their members, this is a time for credit unions to be who they are by mission defined. So it is a time to extend empathy, to really understand what their members are experiencing, to provide better solutions. And that's really a reinvention. It's not saying, well, we've got signature loans, so let's keep offering signature loans, or we have, mortgages that we offer with these terms on them, and that's it. It's really time to look and kind of do some free thinking ground up and say, what are the economic challenges people are facing, and how do we meet them where they are, innovating products and services and delivery channels to really kind of demonstrate we don't just serve the community, we are part of that community, and we step up to meet the specific and unique needs of those communities.
You know, you and I we've been on a call of friends, let's just call it, an ongoing Zoom happy hour, but it's been very interesting. Many are obviously CEOs from credit unions around the country, and when they look at their credit unions and they look at their field of membership, often their field of membership happen to be around a certain industry and how it's different on each one, depending on maybe they serve police officers or firefighters or, a certain company. So it, like, knowing their member and being a part of that community, it does seem more important now than ever. It was probably always important, but it is one of those things,
One thing I would say that it does tie into the real human capital side, because I really took that from more of a broad approach of credit union's mission. But if you want to know your community, you need to represent your community. And that's where this idea of making sure you have a workforce and a volunteer leadership, a board of directors that is of that community, reflects that community and understands that community. That's where you get to a point where you can actually innovate those products and services that are going to meet the needs of the community that you try to serve during a time that's unprecedented, right? I hate that term. We all hate that term. But that's the reality is you can't do things the way you've always done them and expect a different result. And in this environment, things have to be different.
Yeah, I think it is an unprecedented time in the sense that I think it's okay to say, just considering, most of us weren't around for that last global pandemic 100 years ago. So I know you think I'm older than you, but not that much. I have a question that I've asked you before, but I'm interested to see if you have a new answer, I guess, with what you've seen and what you've learned over the past few months. Is there something that you think credit unions need to, fundamentally do different to stay relevant with all that disruption that we've talked about so often on the podcast over the past year and a half? Is there anything new there? Or
I don't know if it's new, but it's definitely going to be stated with more conviction. So how's that? We have to be willing to take a stand, a meaningful stand. People need us to be different. They need us to be who we say we are right now. And it's going to take courage, and it's going to mean developing products and services differently that might not look like what is totally within the constraints of regulatory recommendation. It's going to mean creating a different employee experience. So we're going to, like that whole reference to remote work, we're going to have to learn to be okay with things that may not feel comfortable to us right away. But the well-being of our community depends on it right now. And this is the time for us to step up, to take a meaningful stand and really demonstrate we're not financial institutions. Or not just financial institutions. We're community leaders, and we're there to expand the economic capacity of our community.
I love it. That's a great spot to bring that back to. The last question in the first section of the show here. If we were to sit down a year from now, I mentioned it's tough to break out a crystal ball, but I'm going to ask you to. What are you most proud of that you and your team at Humanidei have accomplished? And for you, because I know you're thinking of the bigger movement as a whole, what are you most proud of that the credit union movement has accomplished in the next 12 months?
All right. So I just said that meaningful stand and stated with conviction. I'm here. A year from now, credit unions will be the model for diversity in banking. We are going to be recognized by Congress as getting it right, and communities are going to be better served and better represented by the leaders who truly reflect them. I'll be proud of Humanidei's specific contribution because we'll have partnered with credit unions across the country to make that happen in their communities.
Beautiful thing. I know you're going to do it. Hopefully we all do. On to the second part of the show. The leadership.
Just giggled on your podcast.
That's fine. We're sitting in our kitchen. So, I mean, you're allowed to giggle. So, to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. Just for those who, if they, for some reason, haven't listened to your past episodes before, and this is their first time, could you let people know what was the inspiration for founding Humanidei?
I will try to be concise on this one. I have worked in and loved credit unions for almost 2 decades now. I am completely convinced that credit unions can be the solution to eradicate global poverty. But the only way we do that is if we're not commoditized financial institutions. And the way we're going to make that difference is with the people who we can attract to lead those credit unions in an innovative way. And what I came to realize was that there are a lot of consulting firms out there, and there are a lot of different resources that credit unions can tap into, but no one was really working specifically in how to tie human capital strategies, the org chart into the business objectives. And that's a place where I feel like I get the human side of credit unions and I feel like I get the business side of credit unions. And I was very inspired and motivated to figure out how to connect those two things in a way that really serves communities better.
Well, it has been amazing to watch and be a cheerleader of over the past year. So it's a beautiful thing you are not only creating, but have created. Well done. How has the inspiration changed over the past year? A year ago, you were just starting this. You were kind of putting all the pieces together, and I was watching you do that. Now that you're an year in, does it look like what you thought it was going to look like a year ago? And is that same inspiration still there? Or?
The same inspiration is definitely there. It's more exciting today than it was a year ago. And there are a couple of factors that are tying into that. About a year ago, while we were in Spain and I was starting a company, from an international environment, I started doing some research and doing some writing around the idea of remote work and how important it was to financial institutions. So fast forward, 8 or 9 months. And, this thing that I thought was my little kind of side hobby about being interested in remote work is like a critical issue for credit unions that I'm like, ooh, I know things. And so that became something that was exciting to be able to put that to use. And then, when we talk about the past few months, it's really COVID is the big kind of like, this is the global pandemic we are all living through. Yep. And we would be remiss if we didn't also talk, though, about the racial injustice issues that have been highlighted. And, maybe this isn't to some degree sort of a perfect storm of people are still more homebound than they were a year ago at this time and more closely following news cycles and social media, less able to sort of turn things off. And so people may be paying better attention to what's really going on related to racial injustice, maybe than they ever have before. And it's creating this great opportunity and this great challenge for anyone who is part of a community and credit unions certainly as leaders in their community to look at this situation and say, where do we stand on this and what is our role in this? And so many of them have reached out to look for support and guidance on that. So again, like that's another sort of really exciting thing to be in that position where credit unions who are looking to connect with their communities better, that I have the experience and I'm in the position because of what I started a year ago to be able to work with them in that area.
You have been busy. It is, and it's amazing to watch. And it's really cool because of what you did start a year ago before all of this was front and center. You set yourself up to have the capacity to actually work with all these credit unions. So like I said, it's been amazing to watch. I'll just sit here and be your cheerleader. So you work, I was really interested to ask you this question. You work with a ton of different leaders from around credit unions, and so many of them are doing amazing things. So I've asked you a lot of the questions that I've asked other people on the podcast before, so I wanted to switch it up a little bit. In today's world, when you think about all the leaders that you've been working with over the past few months, what's it take to be a good leader?
Courage. And
use your line, tell me more.
What I've seen over the past few months especially is this real need for leaders to have courage, to take a stand, to be vulnerable, to risk making a mistake, to ask for help. This is new territory we're all in. There's not a CEO alive today, to kind of use your reference earlier. There's not a CEO alive today who was the CEO the last time the world dealt with a global pandemic. And so this situation where they're looking to create precedent, to create systems, to create policies, to serve their communities, to serve their employees, to nurture people. If they walk in and say, oh, don't worry, I've got it all under control, and they don't have the courage to be able to say, this is how we're going to solve this, and I'm open to your feedback. The irony of it is the leaders that step forward like they have all the answers are the ones who are going to end up making the most mistakes. And so those leaders who have the courage to show that they don't know it all are going to be the ones who fare better through this.
Something I even think back to a mutual friend of ours, James, being on the podcast recently, and many others talked about having the courage to support trying, and if you fail, you fail, right? Like, but you have to try new things. And to instill that even in the teams, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, you got to be trying different stuff, and that failure is one step closer. I know that doesn't directly tie into what you were saying, but it's something that was just in my mind there.
Kind of does. So there was this book I read in like the 3rd grade, and it's called How to Be a Perfect Person, and I think it's 10, maybe it's 3 days. I don't know, some short amount of time. And the whole premise of the book, and it made me so mad when I read it because I was expecting a guidebook, and instead the purpose of it was kind of that nobody can be perfect. But the whole concept of that is the only way to sort of be perfect is to essentially do nothing. And that's that and there's no honor in that.
No, fear can paralyze also. So, as a leader, is there something, and I'm changing this up a little bit again for you since you've been on the show before and answered these, but is there something over the past few months the leaders that you've been working with have heard you say so many times that are like, I know, Jill, and they can finish your sentence?
When I try to think about the sentence that I say the most often right now, unfortunately, it's the one that's, if I stop, then Crosby immediately knows that what's going to follow is watching YouTube. And that seems to be the thing. But at work, I keep on quoting this Chinese proverb, especially in the last few weeks, that's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And the reason for that is that I'm really trying to push some credit unions right now feel like they missed the boat on DEI because they weren't prepared to step up right in the murder of George Floyd. And the reality is that this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, it's not a passing trend. It's something organizations are not going to do for a season and then be done with. It's going to matter as long as organizations employ unique individuals. And so now is the best time to start if you didn't start it already.
Yeah, I love that. Leaders in general have to, from time to time, make difficult decisions. There's not a single one out there over the past few months that I'm sure hasn't had to. Do you have any hacks when you're making that decision that at times may seem unpopular, but you know it's the right one for the greater good for our listeners out there?
Yeah, this is a redundancy from previous podcasts, I know, but know your values. If you know your values, it's easy to make the decision to do the hard things.
Is there a common myth in leadership that people think make a good leader, and maybe tying that to the current times also?
Yeah. So in that vision Venn diagram with a circle for what's humanly possible and another circle of what's expected from a great leader, like what the mistake we make or the myth we have. And I believe that humanly possible circle is actually smaller and completely confined within that what's expected of a great leader circle. And that's the myth that I really want to debunk. I heard this great story recently about some women who developed a leadership development program where the top executives were inviting other women from their organization to come home with them for dinner right after work.
Okay.
So what ends up happening then is these women walk into these homes of these have it all together executives, and they see the slobbery dog and they see the kids with the backpacks on the floors, and they see that life is still there, and it really helps to make the C-suite seem a lot more approachable. And I think that's so important for humans to be able to do that. And so that's kind of that myth I want to debunk, is that once you hit this C-suite level, everything is clean and tidy and you're above the mess that exists with humanity.
That's funny you say that, because multiple people on the podcast have said before, in the question of what's not as important anymore, they're like, a clean house, thinking that I could put it all together, right? So I can see why, it humanizes maybe the leader that people look up to. So is there a mistake that you've seen leaders make during these times that we're living through that you think others could learn from and maybe help us all prepare better for the future?
Yeah. I think that example I just shared is a great, it's a mistake to think that in order to be a C-suite executive, you have to have everything under control. And I think it's a mistake that can keep people from aspiring to those roles, because they don't, if they feel I'm not as put together as Teresa Freeborn, so I can't be a CEO ever. And it's Teresa may be oh no, there's plenty of like, so, and she's one
a former
of the
guest on the show. So
she's one of the best at modeling and demonstrating and bringing others along for it. But so that kind of that myth of debunking that, I think.
Well, we will for sure link to her episode in the show notes below. So everybody check out Teresa's if you haven't listened to it also. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson? You mentioned the Chinese proverb that you keep going back to recently that you received or that you've found yourself going back to in the past few months.
I keep, again, redundant from a previous episode, but when I was in my early 20s and Tracy Kenyon gave me that let the chips fall advice, that is, I still fall on that all the time. And as I'm trying new things and innovating differently and standing firm on my convictions, that advice still matters and still is relevant every single day.
If people are new to the podcast with this episode, they're going to have to go back and check all these out.
Sorry.
Teresa, I mean, you've got Teresa, we've got Tracy. This is amazing. They'll all be linked there. Don't worry. You can go listen to those too or listen to them again. Something that you've talked about, and I know something even that was important to you when you were starting Humanidei was this idea of mentors. And I think from a lot of the conversations that not only you and I have been having, but people in our network have been having over the past few months is I think it's even more important than ever that you have like a strong network and a mentor to lean on. Why do you feel like this is such an important thing? And is it more important now, I guess?
Yeah. So I love my mentors. I love those connections. And what really matters now, or what's really clear right now, is that feelings of isolation are so damaging. They're damaging to how effective we are. They're damaging to how we feel. In the last few months, for everybody, have really heightened feelings of isolation. Even for people who have typically really good social networks, but it's lonely at the top. It's tough to make. It's lonesome to make difficult decisions. It's lonely to not be able to get on an airplane. So in these times, like mentors, mentoring, networks, those things can make us feel more normal for feeling, down in the dumps, for feeling like we don't have all the answers. But mentoring can make us feel more normal, more capable, more connected. So absolutely, yes, super critically important. So,
and does the same hold true for having a strong network also?
Yes. I mean, there's I guess that's part of it is maybe I'm a little fluid in my description where I was on a panel that Caroline Willard sponsored one time, just name dropping for you here. But
also on the show, we'll link to her episode. So.
And one of the statements I made during it that somebody laughed about later was like, if I've met you, you've mentored me. And so maybe I'm a little fluid in my description or definition of what a mentor is, but there's something you can learn from everyone. And that network adds to that too.
So it's a newer question to the podcast, but many of us at different times in our life have felt a little bit lost or uncertain, and my guess is there aren't many of us out there who haven't over the past few months. That means that as a leader, not only do we sometimes feel that way, but our colleagues probably feel that way as well. Any hacks that you have to get through these points of self-doubt or being lost, like what in the world is going on today, right?
Yeah. Stay connected, extend grace. And if I'm having a bad day, if I'm feeling like I'm not getting it right, reaching out to someone else, not necessarily for support, but just for that point of connection, it can be such a reality check. And then extending grace to others can help us remember to extend grace to ourselves too. So it's kind of that like, if your friend came to you and said, boy, I feel really down, you wouldn't be like, well, you should, you're stupid. Like, right? And yet that's how we talk to ourselves sometimes. Absolutely. And so that ability to extend grace and staying connected is super important.
You've done a really good job of extending grace to me. I haven't been on an airplane or to a foreign country in 4 months, so I know I've at times been a little cranky. But you've been amazing. So thank you.
Yay.
So I know the answer to this, but I think everybody else will have a little bit of fun with this also. What does the typical workday look like for you right now? And as an like an odd add-on at this point, what would the perfect workday look like for you?
I just can't even with this question. There's like literally tears of disbelief in my eyes right now.
CEO, homeschool teacher, all that stuff.
Summer camp counselor. It hasn't been an easy few months, and our house is not designed to be a school and a camp and 2 offices and all of those things. But in all seriousness, no, and I'm certainly not alone in dealing with this burden of it. And, you get the pass through of it as well. But a perfect workday remains the one where at the end of it, I feel like I made an impact, and where I feel like advances got made, where for at least a brief moment, I can tune out whatever else is going on and just really connect with a client or a friend. Usually they're one and the same, and help them to see opportunities and start to really make a difference with their teams and their organizations and their communities.
I'm going to name drop one more person from the podcast. I was emailing with Sam Paxson today, and she said she was very happy to not be a teacher anymore for a couple months. So I know I think that's across the board. People were ready for the school year to be over with. So before we move on to the last part of the show, if you have a free day, there's nothing on the calendar, which recently has not been often, but you do a good job of making time. What passions do you have outside of credit unions? What is Jill doing currently to recharge during a global pandemic? What does that work-life integration look like for you with everyone home all the time?
Oh, this is hilarious. I took a few notes. I didn't even put a note down on this. I don't know. And this is, what a horrible, horrible thing, right? Like, I think, I've talked a lot about, for 10 years, I've talked about, I love work-life integration and not work-life balance. And now I kind of want to go back and, without using violence, slap my previous self because we're just a little too integrated right now. Candidly, it's hard to find the boundary between work and home right now. And this is from somebody who was working from home before this all happened. But
you and I have talked a lot about that. We both worked from home before the pandemic. So we were better prepared for this than people that never had. I've had so much empathy towards friends and colleagues who are doing it for the first time also while teaching.
Yeah, it's a different world. And because everything is so integrated, in all honesty, I think the lesson that we've learned is we have to leave the house sometimes. Even if it's to go for a drive, it's, the options aren't as good as they used to be about where we could go when we left the house.
We're seeing a lot of beautiful parts of New England now that we never saw before.
And we're making the best of it. We've spent a lot of time reframing what good is and what good looks like. But yeah, that's what recharging comes with getting out of the house these days.
And we now walk every morning together. It's delightful. I'm ready to get on an airplane with you, though. Okay, last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. You know the game here. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. So I've had to come up with a few new rapid fire questions since you've answered the others on past episodes. If you could do one job that has nothing to do with credit unions or human capital, what would it be?
I'd be a novelist.
Oh, yes. You're the best writer I know. So I think that's a fantastic. And what would you write about? Do you have a story idea?
If I say it, then I have to do it. I'm going to write about a boy and a dog in Cuba.
I specifically asked that follow-up so you put it out there in the world. I cannot wait to read that book. On the flip side, what's that job you would never want to do?
This is one that people are going to be like, what? But I don't ever want to be in charge of project management for a hotel construction.
Oh,
there's just the idea of the punch list on that type of job intimidates me so much that when I think about it, it actually causes me to have heart palpitations.
There's so many things there. That's amazing. Number one, that you've thought about this, and it's very specific.
Can you imagine the number of light fixtures you would have to specify? It's just, there's too much. There's too much.
I've thought about adding this question to the podcast going forward after I thought about it for you, because I wonder over the next few months how many people would go, teacher,
Oh.
I don't want to be a teacher, right? Like, so I thought I used to want to teach, but no, I want somebody else to do that.
Turns
for
out
me.
3 months of summer aren't worth it.
No, I don't want that. So respect for all the teachers out there, like my sister and brother-in-law and your brother. So, do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off? Personally, I feel that these are more important now than ever, and they create that sense of normalcy in a world that isn't maybe providing us with a whole lot.
I mean, I love our walks together. That's nice. It's interesting because working from the same house, we still don't really have conversations with each other during the day. So our walks are a great chance to connect. I'm about 125 days into a meditation streak, and I'm definitely noticing the value of that. And then I decided to train for my first half marathon in a few years. And I don't think I realized how off I felt when I wasn't running regularly until I got back on it. And so that's been key too. Definitely a lot more elements of routine introduced over the last few months, though, that I had before this.
Absolutely. I think they're important to have. So the random question, I know the very first time you were on the podcast, you had a tough time coming up with, it was the question that stressed you out, was the best album of all time. Has there been a song that you find yourself over the past few months listening to? Maybe that one that gets you moving, or like you said, training for the half marathon, gets you running, dancing around the house?
It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy to hear Nobody But You by Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani. It makes me think of you.
My baby.
Giggling again.
So we're so professional in these. I think that's why people like them. Yeah, I just have to throw this out there. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you've been on 4 episodes. That's over 5,800 downloads. And then if you count the episode that you hosted, the season finale with me, you're responsible for over like 7,700 downloads. I mean, it's amazing how many people have listened to us.
How many of them were your mother? No,
That's true, right?
I'm just kidding. We love Linda.
Thanks, Linda. She'll be happy that she got a shout out. Hey, Mom. So you have stacks of books now all over the house, and really, since you've always had books, and we've always had books around, but since you've started Humanidei, you are educating yourself constantly. What have you been reading the past few months? What's the book that you think everyone should read? Mm-hmm.
So I will limit this to one. The book is Me and White Supremacy. Everyone should read it. And I'm totally geeked out about the idea of having a credit union book circle around that book. So anyone who reads it and reaches out to me, we will bring them into a book circle on that one too.
I am 8 days into the exercises on that. I actually have Jill's book that has so many outline or underlines and colors all over it.
You have to do your own journaling though, Randy.
Hey, I love to journal. So I started a separate journal for that. And I actually got the audio book too, because I comprehend better that way. So during this pandemic, what has become more important to you? And has anything become less important?
Taking care of each other has become more important. Extending empathy. And I think I was pretty, my emotional intelligence scores were pretty good before, but I really think that the recognizing how truly deeply interconnected we all are, turns out a global pandemic is a really good way to show that. And, how much our actions impact the lives of others. And so that's become more important. And I guess I don't know.
I'll say it. Wear a mask, people.
I guess that I don't know if this really is the right answer to the question about what's become less important, but it feels to me like maybe harmony is less important to me today than it was a few months ago. And by that, I mean, so by nature, I'm a consensus builder. I'm a gap bridger. I'm a common ground finder. And honestly, though, over the last few months, maybe even more so than unprecedented times, the term that just makes me cringe is this agree to disagree. I'm not willing to agree to disagree in order to keep the peace anymore. I think it's important to be having really honest conversations about what it means to be a global citizen and to understand the responsibility that we host as members of a community, and recognize that it goes beyond those we immediately touch. And we need to be tapping into this infinite capacity we have to care for others and extend empathy to other humans. And so from that perspective, keeping the harmony has become a whole lot less important to me than tapping into that.
You are amazing. I'm one lucky dude. I'd say this was I generally say this is the question I didn't send, but you've been on the show enough, it was coming. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind today?
So right now in this immediate moment, and it may just be that I had kind of another inspiring conversation with her, and where we are right now today, Renae Sadoway might be the hardest working woman in credit unions right now. She is, I don't think the woman's sleeping, but she is in a place, and the reason why she's so inspiring to me in this moment is because, she did not say, oh, it's time to step up and take advantage of an opportunity. She has been consistently, banging this drum, carrying forward this message, advocating for a cause that's so important to her about diversifying the credit union space, advancing people of color, making credit unions more inclusive. And, she's been there and she's been working that. And she's in a time period this last 4 weeks or so, maybe longer by the time the podcast airs, where she has risen to every request to help educate and advance others in this system for the well-being of the system. There's another podcast you can link to.
Right? We could link to Renae's. I am also a huge Renae fan, and I do wonder if she's had any sleep in the past couple months.
No. And
it is amazing to watch.
And someone who loves what she does that much and can work that hard for it, that's successful.
Way to go, Renae. Woo. Thank you again, Jill, for being on the show again and sharing your story. I'm sure you will be back back on the show soon. And hopefully we're recording this from a place that we took an airplane to get to and not the island in our kitchen. My last question for you. Do you have any final asks of our listeners today or final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I'm going to steal this one from my good friend Brian Schools at Chartway. It was a sign off he had for an email that I saw recently, and I think it's the most beautiful thing, but be well and be kind.
Yes, that is a good one. That's for sure. We should all be kind and well. Everybody stay healthy. We'll link to everything we talked about in the show notes today and all those people that we mentioned as well. And you can listen to their episodes after you're done with this one. What's the best way for people to reach out to you? I know a lot of people have been getting a hold of you, but if people have other questions or they just have questions of you, LinkedIn, the Twitter machine, email, is there a preferred method for people to reach you?
I've been super active on LinkedIn lately, and then the best way to get a timely response from me is jill@humanidei.com.
We will link to all your social machines and as well put your email in the show notes. Thank you again, Jill. Please stay healthy, because if you get the COVID, it means Crosby and I are too. Have a great rest of the day, my love.
Thank you.
Before we go, I would like to thank you all for listening. We could not do this without your support. I am so grateful that you tune in every week and listen to these conversations that we get to have with the thought leaders. So thank you very much. I also want to thank Jill for taking the time out of her busy schedule. Her schedule has been crazy recently. After I cooked dinner, meaning ordered some Thai food from Uber Eats, to share her experiences with all of us. And a big thank you to our sponsors, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been a longtime partner of ours and supporter. So please make sure to click on their links in the show notes and give them some love. See everything they have going on to help the credit union community. Also, we are on all the podcast players out there: Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and the list goes on. We would appreciate if you would subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, maybe even a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It really does help with the visibility of the show and us spreading this credit union love. If you don't think we're worth the 5 stars, forget that I asked and just reach out to me directly. Let me know where we can improve. And then don't forget about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. If you need some stimulation for the old mind, we've got you covered. Get your next book recommendation from the guests on our show. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you all have a great day, and please stay healthy, friends.